Are you ready to speak?
Ladies and gentlemen, we will go ahead and start with questions to Justice Oversight. I am Senator Molly Baumgartner. I was elected to be Vice Chair of the committee. Unfortunately, our Chair, Representative Jennings, is not able to be with us today. Is trying to listen in and hopefully we'll get some feedback from him. But he did ask me to fill in his stead. So I will do that. And I want to thank those of you that were able to participate this morning in the tour of the correctional facility here in Lansing. I think that was, I think it's always helpful for us to have not only feet on the ground, but also eyes on what is really happening inside and not just kind of that 3,000. I have been asked to start us with roll call, so I'm simply going to call your names so that we have them on the record. So we'll start with Senator Dole.
Dole, yes. You.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Senator Dole. Representative Breslin. Senator Corson.
Here.
Representative Carlton. Senator Bowers. Here. Representative Owens. Here. Representative Heiberger. Senator Faustido. Here. Senator Hoffman. Here. Senator O'Shea. Here. Senator Finn. We also know that Representative Jennings is unable to be with us. Also on the committee is Senator Erickson, who is absent today. She is serving on another today. We do have one item this afternoon, and that is going to be our presentation from Scott Schultz, who's our Executive Director for ks.gov. And it's been my experience to just go ahead and have that speaker start moving us forward with the presentation. But since we have new members to this committee, if as he is speaking, there's something that's not clear or something you want him to say over again for us, just go ahead and I'll recognize you. Representative Owens is going to help me. Well, I look right and miss somebody, but make sure that we get those questions answered. I don't want us to wait till the end and then go back to slide deck number 3 and say, try to revisit that. The other thing that I do want to mention, and this was a request of mine and did hear it with Representative Jennings, but included in your packet is the report that Joint Committee came up with from last year when we went through it and was submitted to the 2021 Kansas Legislature. And so the reason I point this out, you may want to go to tonight or tomorrow. One thing I would like you to give some consideration to is not only first 9 or 10 pages, but at the end, starting with pages 11, there were specific recommendations made out of this committee last year. And I thought this would be a helpful starting point for those that were on the committee last year to revisit. Oh yeah, we did say that. Where did we get with those recommendations? But for those of joining the committee for the first time, it might be helpful for us to give ahead of time some thought, because when we are meeting on Wednesday, that is how we will conclude the Wednesday session, is that we will actually make recommendations. And we'll have our discussion and we'll make our recommendations for the report. I do think it would be helpful if we really try and hone in on what things we feel we might be able to accomplish this legislative session. What things do we think that the department needs to try and accomplish, maybe get started on or get accomplished before we can move forward on some of the things that we would like to see happen as well. So I thought it would be helpful for you to see, to just kind of take a little look back. This is what we hope, this is what we intended, and see if that might help guide us with that process during this interim session. Also, for those of you new joining us, on that very first page, it does really specify in bullet points what the charge of this oversight committee actually is. So we're going to try and stay in those lanes that are identified as far as what our charge is, and certainly the information that we receive today and the next few days will help us with that. Just as a quick preview, but tomorrow morning we do start at 9. Steakhouse. The 9 o'clock sheriff is when we're going to try and get things rolling, which means all of our support staff will already have been there probably for at least a half hour, trying to make sure we're ready to go. But we will be ready. We're going to be up on the 3rd floor, 346 South. And lunch will be provided by Stuart Little. And we were going to see if midway through that lunch, because we had quite a few folks identify that they wanted to share some public comment. And so I know that Meredith was looking to see if some of those folks might be able to come a little bit early so that it would essentially be a working lunch. If that doesn't work out, then you will find ways to talk amongst yourself, or maybe go visit your office there at the Carlton. Hasn't visited in a while. I think now you're absolutely ready. Mr. Schultz, thank you so much for being here. Again, our executive director. So it's showtime.
And Vice Chair, thank you so much. Members of the committee, thank you for inviting me. We're very happy to be able to present to you today. A few things. Obviously, you've got your materials in front of you. I'm going to try and get by that in pretty short order because I know you have plenty of things. So I will say that as I was coming up here, driving up here, I noticed that other than the wonderful fall foliage all over the area, that I had a few more gray hairs since I've seen all of you in person anyway. And I can only surmise that maybe that I would see you guys more often. That might not be the only reason, but so today I'd like to talk with you about, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Scott Schultz. I just going on my 10th year as the executive director, originally from North Central Kansas, but I've been in Topeka for about 20 now. But previously was a prosecutor, assistant U.S. attorney, so I did federal and state prosecution from everything from murder to securities fraud. And so this was a pretty good fit when I was tapped to be as the executive director and looking more at policy, obviously, than just in the trenches. But I feel like I can bring more to things because I've been in the courtroom, I've been in those instances, I've been in the sentencing circumstances. So I feel like I have a little bit better feel for things that others may not, that if I just came into it from a policy standpoint. So with that, it kind of forms a basis of a few things that we're going to talk about today. This is kind of a normal thing that we normally do on this particular committee, that we talk about our annual report. We talk about the prison population projections, and then at the end, I kind of give you a preview of what kind of recommendations that the commission is actually going to be making for the 2020 session. So with that, Alex is going to help me out. Alex and I are lifelong friends as of just a few minutes ago, so I appreciate his help. So we have a 17-member commission, much like a lot of the other commissions and boards that are throughout the state. This one in particular, though, this pretty much carries all the heavy hitters in the criminal justice space. We have 2 members from the House, 2 members from the Senate that are here. Representative Heiberger has been a very valuable member, along with the other legislators on our commission. our chair and vice chair have to be judges. So we have Judge Fowler as our chair, Judge Sexton is our vice chair, and then we have folks from the entire cross section of the criminal justice system. Prisoner Review Board, Secretary of Corrections is represented, AG's office, court services, community corrections. We have, in fact, we even have Tremaine Wilson, who is a former prisoner at Lansing and former mayor here at Leavenworth. And I think I saw all of his signs coming in. I wanted to vote for somebody. There are so many signs when I was driving in. But so we have a couple of public members. Some of you may recognize Pat Carlton, former legislator and House Corrections chair. And we have a very active commission, very engaged. The point of having them on the commission certainly is to be able to bring you, we vet a lot of things in the commission to bring to you those recommendations that I'm going to talk about in just a little bit. So next slide, please, Ellen. So just some of the things, we have we're a very small agency, but our job is to bring value to our stakeholders. The legislature is one of those stakeholders. Governor's office, Department of Corrections is one of our stakeholders. KBI, anything you can think of as far as criminal justice related, we are probably have our toe dipped in that. We are bringing value because we collect data. And as this indicates, especially in the legislative context, starting in January, we will be giving those normal committees, House Corrections, Senate Judiciary, and House Judiciary, bed space impacts and fiscal impacts on what the function of those bills are. And you'll see those on a regular basis. So we do those not only for our bills, but also for every single bill that may have specifications. Certainly presenting to this committee is one of those duties as well. But we are the state statistical analysis center for the state of Kansas. We have a specific statute that requires other agencies to provide data to us if it's relevant to our request as far as the analysis that we're doing. And so we have had great success in being able to cooperate with those other agencies to get their data to be able to provide meaningful data to you for policymaking purposes. One of the things as far as I have a research department that they maintain all of the databases that we utilize as far as our computer models and those type of things. We have our own databases, and then we actually get KDOC data, we get KBI data, and so we have somewhere in the neighborhood of over 4 million records that we're able to utilize in being able to bring information to you. The part of that piece of our job is education. I have a special projects director, and that's her only function is to educate judges, lawyers, members of the public as to what the sentencing guidelines are all about and other criminal justice things. We do have a manual, best reference manual that some of you may be aware of. It is the Bible in terms of criminal justice sentencing, and we update that on an annual basis based upon what you all do during the session and any court interpretations that actually happen. In the summertime, we are looking at, we are required by statute to do prison population projections for the Department of Corrections. We get all of their data and have about 6 weeks to turn that around. And so we spend the process, I'll talk about that in a little bit, but we spend the process of doing that to turn around the projections that you see. It's a 10-year model. You'll see in the presentation. We also have an annual report that we put out that shows trends in our in the criminal justice system. This is kind of more of an interesting situation now in the last couple annual reports, just simply because of COVID and how that's affected previously, and you'll see some of that in the charts. it pretty much is pretty steady Eddie increase, and then the bottom drops out of it. So,
Senator Costa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what's the benefit of doing the annual prison bed population count in the summer?
That's a great question. Since the fiscal year ends, obviously at the end of June, DOC then can cut its data usually within that first 10 days of July, and then they get that data to us, and then we have the ability to get that turned around. We then have a series of consensus group meetings that we meet with judges, DOC staff, to talk about some of the things that are maybe happening that weren't in the past, and then incorporate that into the projections. So we do that in the summer, mainly because the data is only available once the fiscal year is done, and then we're able to have that, get it to the commission for recommendation, and then it's available for public consumption. Thank you. Some of you are aware that one of the other programs in addition to the research is the 2003 SB 123 Substance Abuse Treatment Program. This is a program that has been around for many, many years that is for those individuals that are convicted of possession of controlled substances. If they satisfy certain criteria, we're able to, the judge is actually able to order them into the Senate Bill 123 program. These are treatment providers throughout the state. There's about 140 of them or so that have been certified by the Department of Corrections, and then the Sentencing Commission acts as the bank. So if you see our budget, and it's huge based upon the size of our agency, it's a pass-through situation where we are paying providers in your jurisdictions to provide substance abuse treatment to these folks that have been convicted of possession of controlled substances. In limited instances, small sales now have been, legislature has included those as well. So as of last year, legislature passed House Bill 2026 that allows for substance abuse treatment in diversion contexts, so that those folks that before they even get into the system can apply with their prosecutor, and now the prosecutors have another tool to be able to provide them with substance abuse treatment at the diversion level rather than having them go through the system. So we are looking forward to administering that particular program as well. Because we have data, we get private research requests all the time. That is Division of the Budget is always asking us to find ways to have to get revenue. Since we are pretty much receive all of our appropriations from SGF, a little bit from federal grants. They're always asking us to find some way to get revenue. That death reference manual, we sell that, but then we also have private research requests from East Coast, West Coast, and everywhere in between. Ivy League to Mountain West Conference. So it's kind of one of those things that folks are doing, academic scholars are doing research. Kansas has a wealth of data, and that's why they come here. So we charge them for the use of that data. So that's another revenue generator. It isn't a huge amount, but it actually is some for us to be able to do training for staff. We do, as I said before, we have an educational component as far as our training and information. We also have a Q&A helpline, another Leavenworth tie. My part-time staff attorney actually is one of the assistants at the Leavenworth County Attorney's Office, and he's not working full-time with them. He's actually handling our question and answer helpline that he helps judges, attorneys, court service officers when they're actually needing assistance as far as the sentencing guidelines are concerned. So many times they can't get the legal information that they need, and this is a great opportunity for us to be able to step into that space. As I indicated, very small office comparatively to the other agencies, but we do a heck of a lot of stuff. And again, our main goal is to bring value to you and to the rest of our stakeholders. We do that with data. So that's next couple slides are simply just history as far as the commission was concerned. So relatively new agency. In 1989, prison overcrowding issues, the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council had suggested that a sentencing commission started, and so it was in place. Part of those things that you can see the last couple bullets on that particular slide. There was at that time there were what was called indeterminate sentencing, and many of you heard could hear on the radio or whatever else. So and so convicted of kidnapping and got 15 to life or 5 to 15, or so there was a broad range of what the judge could actually sentence. And part of the problems that we were running into certainly were there were disparities that started going on in terms of looking at race and geography. Those individuals, I've worked in smaller jurisdictions, and I've worked in larger jurisdictions, and there's some of those things that you can see that a judge that handles one burglary every 4 or 5 months is potentially going to treat something differently than a judge that handles 12 in one afternoon. So it was just some disparity that was going on. There was proportionality situations, and then there was also, when you got 5 to 15, you probably did about half that, and then indeterminate. Some of you probably heard in Texas, for example, you do about half what your life sentences really aren't life sentences. So, the Sentencing Commission set out to look at what would be good, what would be a good format going forward to have determinate sentencing, and so that's essentially how the Sentencing Commission came about and started proposing for in the next couple of years the sentencing guidelines.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, the overcrowded is in the prison. Do you have a percentage or breakdown on those with new crimes versus just probation violations?
We do, and I'll get to that in just a second. We have direct commits versus probation violators, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. Thank you. So, from 1989, the commission was formed. At that particular time, then, the Sentencing Guidelines Act was proposed, and then 1993 was passed. These last couple bullets that you have before you, the incarceration was reserved for the most serious offenders. That still is the truth today. And primary purposes of prison were incarceration, incapacitation, and punishment. And that is, we have changed our philosophies since 1993 on how we do things. And nowhere in there do you see rehabilitation, simply incapacitation and punishment. So times have changed since then. So the sentencing guidelines, which are made up of a couple of grids, and I've included those in the materials. One might ask, why do we have those? And these 3 reasons are kind of shoot that point home. It actually establishes more equity than the indeterminate scheme for those individuals. So I know the way that the guidelines are set up is that based on the severity level of the crime and your criminal history is how you're going to be treated. And so a similarly situated individual that commits the same crime as I do but has less criminal history is not going to be punished as much as me. Because I have that higher criminal history, and it makes logical sense. The guidelines then is set up specifically to facilitate that particular philosophy. Many other jurisdictions that have sentencing guidelines have many points, and you take off things, you put on things, and ours is modeled after Oregon, and it's very simplistic in its nature, but it's very effective because the whole point of this was to be able to allow parties, victims, the defendant, as well as the attorneys and the judges to be able to understand just exactly what that individual could expect if they were convicted of that particular crime. And so during negotiations or whatever else, they could advise, prosecutor could advise victim, defendant could know what they were up against. And so at the end of the day, it allows for more certainty. It is not so rigid, however, that it doesn't allow for judge discretion, or the party's discretion. So departures are actually part of the process in which there is discretion built into the system. So if there are atypical situations that may be more heinous, for example, there are aggravating factors that can occur. If it's less than what a normal death would be, then there could be mitigating circumstances that can actually be used, and that sentence could either be decreased or even probation given in that context. At the research level, finally, it allows for more certainty in making our projections. We would not be able to do any type of population projections that you see here today without having some level of certainty in sentencing. Some ranges that actually are not as great as what the previous image would be sentencing. So these three items play a pretty pivotal role in how we can actually then give you the information that you receive every year. Just a few things that we do on an annual basis. Again, we're suggesting our recommendations as far as legislative changes, what the Commission has seen. We track all of those relevant bills, and then on an annual basis. Next few slides, again, as I was telling you about, these are the grids themselves. This is a non-drug grid. And then we have on the next page is the drug grid. Again, what you see is based upon the severity level of the crime, and then on the horizontal axis then is the criminal history. It's for all months. And so what you see, everything in white is presumptive prison. What you see in blue is called a presumptive imprisonment box or a border box. That is allows the judge some discretion as to it is a presumptive imprisonment box, but the court can actually place them on probation if the facts warrant it. And then finally, the green boxes are presumptive probation. So if you were to fall in a 5E, for example, you're looking at 18 to 22 months with a midpoint of 20 months. This is the drug grid, for example. 1 through 4 is all distribution, manufacture, sales. And then all your possessions are level 5s. So you've got greatest to least as far as seriousness. The same thing goes on the non-drug grid as well. And so again, this gives us a little bit more certainty from not only, like I said, from the research standpoint, but especially we have these are the grids that the office maintains. You will see these on most council tables in the state. And that is just simply because whoever's doing this can tell their client, okay, remember where you are on the grid. As long as you told me what your criminal history is, this is probably what's going to happen. And so these become very important tools. And this is, again, we maintain these on a yearly basis. The annual report again, establishes some trends throughout the state. And keep in mind, when we're talking about sentencing guidelines, we're only talking about felonies. So none of the misdemeanors are going to be included in here. We don't handle misdemeanor crimes. There's just too many of them. There's somewhere between 15 to 17,000 felony cases every year, and it's enough for us to deal with. So keep in mind that this annual report is from FY 2020, which you'll see in the projections is FY 21. So just be aware of what we're looking at. Many people ask, what are the top 5 offenses? So for those receiving prison, probation, and jail, this is the breakdown. Drugs, by and large, continue to be hold that first place. unfortunately. And then some others sprinkled in there as far as non-violent violent crimes. Mine, and sometimes this is, hopefully this isn't too simplified, but keep in mind, prison is state prison, jail is for county jail. So we do have some crimes that you can only actually be sentenced to county jail. So this includes everything. So when you see this, you know that all the felony sentences that were done, these were the top five. One of the luxuries we have in creating a journal entry that we're responsible for, and then everybody fills out on every felony in the sentencing situation, is that we can harvest all of that data from that document. And demographic data is one of the main things that most of you are usually concerned about and curious about. So we can actually utilize, for example, the race and gender distribution here, where you see all of the sentences, not just prison or probation or whatever, all the sentences that were out in FY 2020, about 77% were white. Talk about disparity when on the census that you're looking at, 6 to 8% of our campus population in general is African American. 20.4% is actually represented here with the felony census. This is pretty common as far as the numbers in terms of about 8 out of every 10 felonies were committed by males. And that's been pretty consistent throughout the years.
Is there any breakdown of economic scale? Because higher. The only one who's those still, of course.
And that's a great question. Unfortunately, the only thing that we have to look at is not normally, the only thing that we can actually see is efficiency data. And what you normally will see is 85% of the folks that are charged with felony charges are appointed counsel. And so that means they would have had to pay indigent. So that may give you a little bit better idea, although we don't, the forms that we're using, of course, the journal entries don't have specific things, but I can tell you that Heather says that they usually handle 80 to 85% of the felony cases. That's what's just
That 80 to 85% are victims.
Those are the ones that are the sentences. The ones that are sentenced, we can actually take that and see. In fact, we have a specific checkbox whether they've been retained, appointed.
Yeah, follow
Then can you tell me how many like court-appointed attorneys, victims get out of it? Don't get a felony? That's
We don't. And unfortunately, we're in the process right now, and we're kind of excited about that. We're working with OJA right now because they do have some of that data. And if we were able to be, my utopian dream, Senator Dahl, would be to have that OJA data that starts with arrests, starts with prosecution, and has all the charges. So then we can actually tell you, here's what offender A was charged with, here's what he was convicted of, and so on. And so we know, you may have been charged with distribution, but you pled to possession or something of that nature. And so that question comes up quite a bit, getting to that point where, my hope is that we're going to be able to share data to the point where we can actually then follow that offender from arrest all the way through to when they get off parole. And that would be the exciting part, because then we can answer some of those questions. Yeah. The journal entry itself has whether or not they had a jury trial, had a plea, what the disposition was at the time. And so, yeah, we can easily put the two together to find that out. Well, I think to some degree the converse could be true, that those folks that are handling cases like that all the time actually have more expertise in that regard too. Sometimes I'm not saying by any means that their caseload is not such that probably, but keep in mind, normally 9 out of 10 cases would anyway. So that is, if there was more than that, when everybody went to jury trial, the system would 5% so because they just can't do that. So I understand what your point is. That's one of those things that we certainly could be able to tell you, a certain percentage of those court-appointed attorneys. There was a plea in this particular case. There was a jury trial in this case. That's one of the other things. Certainly is and you'll see on this ethnicity, also the age distribution. And one of the things that's important in this particular figure 9 is to kind of show you the normal progression. Normally we see that there's a lot of offenders in the 21 to 24, 25 to 30. Ours is a little higher than you see in some other states because normally what happens, and it kind of probably makes a little sense, as people get older, hopefully they get a little wiser and a little bit more mature and they stop committing a lot of these crimes. You see that same progression with Kansas offenders too, that they age out at some particular part. The only issue here is that a lot of our felony DUI offenders are older. They range, I think, probably in 32 to 33, something like that. And I think that probably bumps up our average a little bit because we're actually counting those folks. Otherwise, your other, normally you're talking to 20, 25-year-olds that are committing most of the offenses. These 3 items are just kind of gives you an idea as far as just prison sentences, what kind of metrics we're looking at. There was a decrease, and keep in mind this is 2020, there was a decrease of 29% of total admissions to DOC in 2020 due to COVID. Still have similar numbers as far as males being a predominant group as far as making up prisons. That would explain, obviously, why we only have 1 women's prison versus the rest of men. And then a little bit more breakdown. Again, here in this situation, Black offenders make up 23%, whereas before they only were like 27%. So folks that are actually being imprisoned, there's actually a higher rate for Black population. I will have 21 for you next year. But what I can tell you is there's been a continuation of that. And so this, I presume that there's going to be similar situations as far as from a whole. We just have not, because this fiscal year is over, it usually takes about 2 to 3 months for staff to actually work because there's so many data. Yes, the trend is surprisingly down, and that continues. We very much as far as our projections are concerned, it was a very difficult time last year, and this year was worse just simply because not the uncertainty of when are we going to get back to whatever normal is. When are the courts going to? Even the courts gives the green light of jury trials at all times. Some of those jurisdictions are not going to. So as it currently sits right now, even after last fiscal year, we are still seeing decreases in population. The population, as far as prisons concerned, it's ticking back up, but the male population continues to decrease. And I'll kind of talk about some of the things there too.
Or Latinos, Hispanics, are they considered white? I mean, we have 73.4 white offenders, blacks, 23%, 0.6. I know that percentage isn't correct, at least in Metro Kansas.
Right. Yeah, and I think we have those included.
White.
White population. Again, this particular one, we're looking just at probation sentences. Your probation officers have seen a decrease, did see a decrease of 23.2% in their caseload. And some of that, most of the stuff obviously is COVID, but, and they were pretty much even as far as non-drug versus drug sentences. So these are the sentences that are being handed down by the judges to say you're going to probation, and we just didn't have the number of sentences that we did in FY15.
It's because of the location.
I'm going to have to defer that to Keith. I don't have a good answer for that. I don't know the answer to that question. I have a share. I'm sorry. I have a stat right now.
Let's absolutely.
Well, you're
Randy Bowman, Kansas Department of Corrections. Oh, sorry. Randy Bowman, Kansas Department of Corrections. Thank you, Madam Chair, members. So based on our 2020 annual report, time grid that Scott's talking about, system-wide, our demographics were African American, 29% of all in our facilities. White was 67, Asian 1, and American %. So it's a little bit higher. It's not that as far as
Right.
find that page. So I have raw numbers. I don't have the percentages, but for example, Lansing last year, 1,078 white and 568 black. So a little bit different ratio there. I'm talking about roughly. I can't get into the whys. I don't know the whys to that. Yes, it's seriousness in the sense it's our horror and our people. Serious crimes that can stack up. Of course, the facility you just went through was part 3. El Dorado, Lansing, Hutch will be keeping those serious offenders.
Thank you. Vice Chair. So Randy, would that also be perhaps to find out Kansas City, those individuals that the inner city, Cedric County, were sentenced, and then that'd also be a reason for that rate. Oh, and this is what I've been wanting to know for a while. When they are the intake process, are you asking where they originally from? You know, because sometimes you incarcerate people that may have lived in Oklahoma or Texas. They're here in Kansas.
So, classify folks. There were some diagnostic units taken from women to help rate up for the adult medication information. There are so many factors that go into that. Their risks, their needs, their offenses, that where they're from is part of that. It doesn't hold a lot of weight.
You don't ask for their address.
Oh, sure, but in terms of where they get sentenced to. So, Lansing is not just people sentenced from the Kansas City all over the state. People from those committees may end up if they're the right classification type at Winfield or other facilities as well.
But I was just trying to help you give a reason why there might be more black people. But if you're saying it's all over the state, that's kind of even worse. And then I just guess I need to know for future reference, if you are saying that Hispanics are considered white, and we loosely use the word people of color, it's like you're including white, or Hispanic, Asian, Native American, and black. So are you now going more to just saying black so you can get an accurate count if Hispanics are putting down, or who's doing that? Are they saying they're Caucasian, or are you saying they're Caucasian?
Now, what we're taking from is the consent investigation report that is done at the time between conviction and sentencing. That information is actually, we're actually, whatever is on those documents is what we actually do. Go back and change anything of that nature. Whatever would be listed as far as an ethnicity on the investigation report, that is what we would actually be entering into. So that's, and if you saw on the other one, we did have a breakdown as far as that ethnicity is concerned too. That kind of parcels out some of that too.
Representative Fresco.
Is visitation play any part? Like closer home schools.
In the same vein as that, that is one classification factor. Sometimes it's not the same, it's not like the highest. Take it into consideration.
I guess to clarify, someone that is convicted from Sedgwick County doesn't mean they're going to have enough rating.
So their whole classification, all the factors of their life, their capacity wise, sometimes it may be okay with or like tomorrow our staff is so bad. It's from El Dorado, it's going to replace it. It's all the complex decision making process.
Thank you for addressing that right now.
Sure.
So in terms of probation sentences for non-drug sentences, this gives you another idea as far as our top 10 of what those offenses are. Theft, play, and burglary, usually those kind of go hand in hand as far as what we normally see. Still have some other violent crime that's frequent as well. So, aggravated battery, threat. So, that just kind of gives you an idea of what are the top 10 crimes. This is what you're seeing as far as
Senator Costa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Scott, I was going to actually say earlier, you looked younger. You looked really in shape and nice, and I've been looking for the gray hair. I don't see it.
it's there.
But do you also have a percentage of those crimes committed related to domestic violence?
Yes, and we certainly could have that. There are certain things that, as far as there are straight felony domestic battery, but then there's also crimes that actually are called DVT that are potentially related to domestic violence that are actually there. So I certainly can provide that for you.
Domestic violence or vehicle violence have restraint.
That would not, if it would be on the sentencing journal entry, we would have something, but normally there's not a specific place there that says, was there an order in place? Is there any type of protection?
Chair, hey Scott, as a bookkeeper, my misleading is expense column is high. I'm kind of wondering what's in it. What's in it? Can you give us some examples? Not that I'm worried,
Oh, sure.
but what is
Any other non-drug related crime that you could potentially think of outside of these things? There's all of the crimes that I'm going to talk with you at the end of the presentation about. There are 11 property crimes, Medicaid fraud, public official corruption. Those don't happen very often. But some of those things, there are 11 of those that there may be a sprinkling of those that, there's one, there's two, there's three here. Those type of things that, identity theft, that's not in here. This is just straight theft. There's other ones that are going to be involved in that. So if there's some non-drug crime that you can think of that might be a felony, as far as drug sentences are concerned, this is pretty common. 8 out of 10 are possessions. The rest are sales, distribution, and manufacture. We don't have that many manufacturers anymore, just simply because it's a lot easier just to get it from cartels, manufacturers. So, of those probation sentences, that's what that breakdown is. Those folks that receive probation. Part of we talked about the guidelines, and there are guideline sentences. So if you fall on the grid, those are guideline sentences. There are off-grid sentences. Those are higher level offenses that homicide. Some of you may have heard of Jessica's Law offenses. If you have sexual relations with a child under 14, those are Jessica's Law cases. And those off-grid offenses, those have been deemed by the legislature to not be within the ambits of that. What that actually means is all of those are life sentences. And you have mandatory minimums starting at 25 years. So anytime you hear this was an off-grid offense, it's off the grid, and it's and that's where the prison review board comes in, and they grant parole to those folks, and then the people on the guidelines that do prison time, they get post-release supervision, and that's of a certain time. Parole is a lot longer, because obviously they're more serious offenses. As it pertains to this, we have off-grid, on-grid, and then we have non-grid offenses. And why that happened, I don't know. But non-grid offenses are self-contained crimes, such as DUI, such as felony domestic battery, cruelty to animals. They're basically encapsulated within the statute, and it has not only elements of the crime, but also the penalties. And so when you go through and you're actually rejiggering with the DUI statute every year, which is usually what happens, you are working on 8-1567, and that is a non-grid offense. All of those things that I talked about, those non-grid offenses, those are all served in the county jail. So that's why we have separate sentences as far as for county jail that isn't figured into our state prison population, because by statute, it can't be served in the state prison. So this kind of gives you an idea of, in 2020, we had 389 DUI, PIS is post-imprisonment supervision. So that's what happens sentencing for DUIs. You spend a little bit of time required in jail, and then you have a post-imprisonment supervision time. Then you have the county jail sentences, like the domestic battery. And so this is just simply the breakdown. Obviously, the overwhelming amount, 95% of DUIs. We don't have that many animal cruelties that actually occur. Thankfully, only 12 sentences as far as is concerned. Johnson County normally leads the way when it comes to DUIs. This is some explanations, or perhaps because of the cross-border issue as to why there's Sedgwick County or any other jurisdiction. But that normally is what happens. About 30% of all. A lot of times, if you look at the big four counties, not that all the rest of them aren't important, but the big four, Sedgwick, Johnson, Wyandotte, Shawnee, normally have about half of the crimes that occur. And so, as they go, many times, so does the rest of the state. And so, this kind of gives you a breakdown of normally, Sedgwick County, for example, 1 of every 5 felonies committed in the state is done in Sedgwick County. That's been true for many, many years. Okay, any other questions before we move on to projections? So I touched on the projections just a little bit. This is a time for the Sentencing Commission to be able to take that data and be able to put it into our computer model. And in doing that, we receive a 10-year projection of what we think is things we're going to look at as far as offense types. What are the drug admissions going to look like between now and that 10-year period? What are violent felonies going to be looking like as well? And so those things are important because then it helps DOC to decide, and it helps the legislature to decide we need to spend $250 million to make a new facility, build a new facility, or are we going to be okay for the next several years? Obviously, as most of you know, ADOC is good in a lot of areas, but they can't, on a dime, basically build a new facility. And so that takes, architectural planning and whole 9 yards. And so for them to have the benefit of the population projections, it at least allows them and gives them time, gives other folks like the legislature to see into the future a little bit. I tell people this is not a crystal ball by any means, but at the same time, our model has been very, very good. And you'll see that in just a second. And I'm very proud of it. So here is, here's the anomaly. The last 10 years of population have pretty much had steadily increased growth until COVID. And now you see significant decreases in population. Part of the 8.5% from here to here, and then another 6.9% increase in the total prison population. So that is where we were standing from 10,000 now all the way down to 8,558 as of the end of June. So quite a significant decrease. That was one of the things we were looking at. One of the other things we measure is admissions versus releases. So that kind of gives you an idea of what that looks like. This red is releases. If it's outpacing those admissions, then you're obviously going to have a decrease in population as well. That occurred back in 2016, but most markedly here in the last couple of years, those releases have been more than the admissions. Even in that situation, even if you have, and part of the projection model, the main basis for it is 2 things: admissions and length of sentence. In this particular case, obviously, you have less admissions. We have a little bit of fluctuation as far as length of sentence, but if you have decreases in either of those or both, you're going to see decreases in population.
Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there any way that we can compare Nebraska and Colorado?
I don't know. We can try.
Because it would be interesting to me to see what our population is compared to. We're all kind of similar. I kind of cheated through this and saw what I could see.
I can tell you right now, anyway, that there are other states certainly that have significant increases as well. In some cases, somewhere between 12 to 20%. So I don't know that we're in fact, I just saw that in the Pew article that was last week. They're probably not see this time.
I'd like to see it like where it was 17 or 18, it was at its peak where they were at, and then what it is now.
Okay.
COVID.
So this one is just a little bit more breakdown to kind of tease. Sorry.
Years and earlier. Or two, did we provide special programming that helped them to get out of there?
I don't know that I can answer that. That would be probably a DOC question. And again,
Randy Levin, KS Farmer Correction. So the dynamic seems to be work driven in the pandemic. Haven't given us new authorities to give more credits for taking those programs. We appreciate the resources. We're seeing recidivism came down slightly, which is something we'll talk about tomorrow, but it seems to be something external to us that's driving the vast majority of this.
I assume so.
Follow on that same question. That was my question. Is the decrease simply that eventually this is all just a trend, right?
yeah, and that's a great point. And that was one of the things that I was going to potentially caution this committee in thinking about. Got smooth sailing ahead, clear skies, and everything else, because what you do have is that backlog of jury trials that the courts are finally getting to. Most of those offenders are most likely individuals that were going to have long sentences. They were facing long sentences because they wanted their jury trial because they couldn't work out their deals. I will tell you, has been a lot of proactiveness in the legal community as far as criminal justice is concerned. There has been many negotiations that wouldn't have happened before from prosecutors has happened as a result of COVID, just because there were issues with keeping large type of cases. So there are things that have happened that wouldn't have otherwise happened before. There are judges that were going to different jurisdictions, mediations in criminal cases that had never happened before. That's worked out splendidly, it's my understanding, and they're going to continue to do those type of things. That alleviates the need to, of course, work our way to the jury trial. But at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. I think that that's going to be problematic because all of those folks that are looking at those off-grid offenses that I was talking about, those are the individuals that are going to be going to jury trial. Those are the individuals who are going to be convicted. Those are the individuals that are going to be 25-year life sentences at least. And so all of those justice law offenses, those all have stacking effects that occur. And prior to COVID, we had at least 70, 75 justice law offenses every single year. And those folks aren't coming out. We've got normal time period in prison, about 2 years, 24 months, something like that, on average. Those folks that are coming up in the system are not getting out at 2 years. So that's going to be an issue. Keep in mind, people are not going to stop committing offenses. And so all the folks coming in behind us is going to be the exact same thing. So those jurisdictions are going to have a lot of issues to deal with. Whether or not you see folks coming back, or the OJ coming back and asking about trial issues again, that could be another factor that the body may have to deal with. Because of this, we've got a prolonged issue. The wave came through COVID. So these are going to be things that are potentially going to delay, and that's what makes projection hard so difficult. It's because we don't know when we're going to push through this situation. information. But yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. There's going to be a, resting on this and looking so good, there is going to be an uptick. And that will be when those jury trials start.
Great example. Next one.
And everybody wants those because they can't have them. And so that's why they're setting. So those are, and again, like I said before, those are the ones that are going to be spending much more time because, and most likely prosecutors have decided to deal with. This is just a probation condition violator. Part of the thing that we look at as well is not only the people who are going directly, go to the court, I get sentenced directly to prison because it comes and picks me up, but also people who get put on probation and they don't comply. One of the things that I want to say with this, though, is let's keep in mind that we only track the violators. In probation context, normally, court services and community corrections officers are having great success in getting folks to comply. Normally, I think around the state average is around 66%, 67% of people going on probation are successfully complying. What we're dealing with is the rest. Folks that don't want to comply, and they either commit a new offense, which is the difference between these two things, or they don't comply with their terms and conditions of their probation. They have a hot UA. They don't show up for their appointments. They're possessing alcohol when they're not supposed to. They don't get a job when they're supposed to. They leave the states. Things like that. That those are all factored in. Even those are decreasing. And you can see this kind of was hit its peak in 2019, and some of that has to do certainly with the fact that there was a lot of in-person. There wasn't a lot of in-person reporting and those type of things, and so that's why things went down. But we still see a decrease in the number of patients.
It seems to me that it was outpacing males as far as say, or has that changed?
Another great question, great observation. One of the things that we look back, the legislature passed several years ago were graduated sanctions, and those were made up of immediate jail sanctions that a probation officer could, if you violated, put you in jail for 2 or 3 days stint. It was a swift and certain, quick dip, swift and certain sanction. One of those other sanctions was if you didn't get the message, we could send you to prison for 120 or 180 days. After 3 or 4 years, our office looked at that to see what kind of effectiveness that was, because it exactly was catching a much larger percentage of the population in those dunks, 120, 180 day sanctions, than it was males. They had 300 and some versus the guys 600 and some, and that's pretty substantial compared to the overall population. So, so we looked at that. There were not hardly any differences in folks that actually were getting these sanctions, and there was a whole lot of trouble that KDOC was going to actually go pick them up, then drop them off, and put them on probation again, and we found that that was not effective. And so we had a bill asked to repeal that particular portion. Since that time, then those numbers for females have actually gone down, and our hope was that that in doing that, that people are more compliant, or they'll find other resources to be able to keep them on supervision longer. We sometimes see with females that there are other circumstances of trickle down issues that we see that we don't see with guys, especially child welfare type of issues with the kids, because it's logical to think that, and so there are other other things at play there that may not be with the guys. Not in every situation, but in a lot of cases there. So, so yes, that would be with the repeal of the graduated sanctions to prison. That particular factor is actually taken out. So everything we were talking about is on what we call the front door. Everything that's, if they go on probation or they get directly committed to DOC, they're going in the front door. We also track back door, which is once they get done doing their time, they actually get placed on parole or post-release supervision. They still can go back if they don't comply with their conditions of parole or post-release. And so again, you see there's a drop off here as well. What I would say with this, however, though, is DOC was doing a lot of things anyway that I think we probably would have seen some decreases already in this, COVID or not. They were actually doing other things, other data-driven issues that would have caused this action. And this is just putting those comparisons together for you on one slide. Probation violators or post-release. So, pretty much what we come up with then, as far as the projections are concerned. What you see here is that 10-year projection, and we divided into offender groups so that we can see that on June 30th, 2021, the prison population was 85-56. The model is telling us that we will have a decrease of 4.5% over the 10-year period, so that we'll end up at 81.72 at the end. So as it stands right now, like I said, before the jury trial come back in, this is probably going to look a little different this year, projections, but we don't know until we have no way of knowing that this data tells us. So as you can see, the only thing that hasn't decreased is the non-drug 7 to 10s. That would be, we're estimating that would be up 2%. The 7s to 10s, those are thefts and burglaries. But so a decrease of 4.5%. Just gives you a visual of what that table looks like. And again, you know, it looks great. It looks great from that standpoint, but you know, I again feel confident there as to what we're going to see. And again, this is why it was so difficult for us to be able to do projections, because it isn't like a regular normal year where you can see those trends, apply them, and then do it. We actually were looking at a projection based upon it going down for a couple more months and then going up for the rest of the year at a 0.5%, and then the year after that, and going up 1% after that. So, so, and the way that it happens then, of course, is that you see that decrease as far as projected. Keep in mind, these are all up top on all of these that you'll see in your slides. These are the capacities, total capacities, and then we have those breakdowns as far as being on the slides. But so significantly, right now we're running at the end of last month. It was upper 70s, 77%, I think, for females, and 2% for males. So back down. So, so they're hovering in that range, and certainly quite a ways from. If you break down, you can kind of go through these, Alex, as far as the male population is
Not historically tracked, it doesn't. That snapshot at the end of this. Don't request a snapshot of jailed versus how many sentenced, or let's say off grid or something like that. estimation of how many right now are being jailed. Slash. So,
Look for the reins. I understand your question. We will take into account folks that have been in jail. Well, what I can say is, not only do we take into account, and also what, while they were sitting in jail waiting for their trial, they get credits for that. And we take that those are all calculated in. The model also takes into account their good time credit, which could be anywhere from 50%, and then program credit that you could have up to 100. But I don't know whether that's actually.
if I was just curious, you think are
No, that is not taking it. The only thing that we're looking at is the ones that have got through the system sentenced. And so that's kind of the caveat that we're talking about. We have a backlog that is sitting out there, and it's going to take some time for the court to get through all that. And if you can think about smaller communities, they have to do jury service. They're going to possibly be called all the time because lots and lots of jury trials to get that point where we've got a
Representative Hyder.
I was just going to try.
Oh,
All right. So again, last couple slides as far as this particular section, just kind of go over again what, as any good agency would, look at our performance. What I normally tell folks is, some of you have heard this many times before, normally what you're looking at in terms of standard deviation is 5% on either side as far as trying to get within that as far as projected versus actual. So this is our projected population. This is what the actual population was, and what the differences in inmates were to get us the percent of error. And so we try and I make our folks stay within 2%. That's what our goal is. We don't always make it, but it certainly makes things a little tighter as far as being able to get better numbers. And the model has been, as I said, excellent in terms of anytime we can have a 2% error rate is with a population of almost 9,000 inmates is fantastic. Not a guarantee. At the same time, it shows us that the model is working. And but for June off, stays within those in that rate. And what you see again is male population kind of male population go that to balance. Just to kind of give you, since we have a lower female population, those fluctuations in percentages are always going to be greater. And so even though we're off 20, it's still 2%. So it's a little bit easier. As of this fiscal year, this gives you an idea of where we are as to these projections that we just covered. The model is holding pretty good. Some of these things, if we project something and it's actually less than that, it's always good. So in our situation, the numbers appear to continue to go down. And when that will stop, it's anybody's guess. But see what we are projecting from the time we are projecting just a little bit less population from the time the beginning of the fiscal year to the end of June. Six inmates. Not that much at all. This just gives you an idea of where we are now on the line graph purposes. That here's the projected amount. Love that, but it's breaking up. Then the last splits out mainly. Okay. So, again, this part of the presentation is always one of those things that to bring to you some of those recommendations that the commission has spent time on. You'll hear me talk a little bit about the Reform Commission, of which some of you are on that, and we'll be hearing this, I'm sure, for a second time. But there are both of the commissions actually are pretty well in agreement with most of the recommendations. And so I would encourage you to, the Reform Commission comes out with their recommendation on December 1st. I think that's what it's supposed to be doing. That there will be a lot of recommendations, and there are a lot of hard work from a lot of the experts in the state, from probation officers to judges, that for change that can be done, especially on the probation side. And the commission has several folks that are on the Reform Commission as well, and so it's actually worked pretty well as far as having almost concurrent recommendations. So what you're going to see that the commission is recommending this year is mostly items, because we're in the biennium, most of the bills are still active, usually either in House Corrections or Senate Judiciary. So, Alex, first one. House Bill 2030 is a Representative Heiberger has kind of championed this issue. This is core to a compassionate release policy that, as of right now, is it's really not realistic within the state. And in terms of having 30 days to be able to allow an inmate, if they're terminally ill or if they're going to be passed away within 30 days, because you can't get the paperwork done during that time period. It's relatively hardly any, if not one or two, maybe in the last 5 years. And so this would actually, some of the things that we've talked about, there's actually even an article that's been done. Kansas is one of the worst when it comes to Kansas compassionate release policy. So the request is to end that from 30 days to 120 days. In mind, there's a whole lot of steps that the individuals go through, not only to have two doctors say, hey, they're not going to make it for 120 days. There's a lot of other criteria as far as public safety in the community, and many other things that the prisoner review board does all the time to make sure that individuals that are going to be let out are going to be safe in the community, of course. So this is something that has passed out of the House already, is now in Senate Judiciary, and that passed fairly quickly after the session starts. As far as this slide is concerned, this green area here for you just to note is the bed savings. So when you see 2023, that's the bed savings in 2023, and then 10 years out, what the bed savings would be. There are some like this one that doesn't have bed savings just simply because they may be administrative or procedural in nature and don't have a significant effect on beds would have. There would be an impact because some of these folks would be leaving prison, but not at a rate that is Next one is House Bill 2031. It's currently in House Corrections. This is a bill. One of the things that you're going to be seeing more of is incentivizing offenders. We do a lot of that to the incarcerated population, and DOC gives them a great opportunity, but we don't do that as much in the probation context. And so this particular bill changes the good time credits that I was talking about before, 15 and 20% to 25 and 40%. It also, for those that have program credit, which are those things that you could take a substance abuse treatment class while you're in prison, anger management, vocational training, those type of things, to actually, with time off of your sentence, this would allow you to have from 120 to 150 days increase. And what that does is, it doesn't sound like much, it's 30 days to one person. You add that in with many inmates, that starts to add up to days as far as prison bed space. So what you can see here is we're estimating this to be 40 beds the first year and then 1. Continuing on the theme of incentivizing offenders on probation, House Bill 2084 actually limits the amount of time you can actually be on probation to twice what your original sentence term is. So most of the folks on probation get 12, 24, or 36-month sentences. This would actually limit that to twice that original sentence. The alternative would be, in many circumstances where you have costs, fees, restitution still due and owing after that time period, that would be sent to collections. Many jurisdictions already do that on a regular basis. You would just send that, terminate them through probation, and then send them to collections. It would also allow for a 50% decrease in probation term if there was substantial compliance with the terms of probation. And then, much like the juveniles, which is exactly the language is exactly the same, they would get 7 days credit for every 30 days compliance period. Again, that is a significant bed savings depending on which scenario. That's why we have 3 days there. That's in house corrections.
Madam Chair, say that one more time. So what's sent to collections?
At the end of many times, but it just depends on the jurisdiction now. Your jurisdiction may not do it, but the law allows for any outstanding costs. The jurisdictions will contract with collection attorneys, and they will actually then collect those funds in a simple way rather than keeping it in the whole point is to continue to extend them on probation just because they haven't paid.
But wait, cost to the inmate or ex-offender who's on probation, and that probation time is shortened, but they still have to pay back.
Right. Right. So keep in mind, these are all folks that would be on probation. They'd be supervised on probation. They would have the ability, if they substantially complied with the terms and conditions of their probation, they could, if they finished their classes, they've gone through substance abuse treatment successfully, that would allow them then to potentially decrease the amount of the sentence. The top limit would be twice the probation sentence. Even if they still had $100 left to pay on restitution, they would either have that time to get it done, or it would be turned over to collections, and their probation would be terminated. So often now, that probation just continues to be extended because you haven't paid off all of your fines and fees. And there's a whole different set of thought to that, philosophy certainly, but a lot of the jurisdictions in the state already will send it to a collection agency.
Representative.
Part of the job on probation. If you find a job, actually, it's the opportunity.
That's within the auspices of the court as well. There is certainly a statute available that an individual can file a motion to modify the sentence and come back in and say, Judge, I'm not able to pay all this stuff. I can only make this much. Normally, that's worked out with the probation officers. They can try and be making some meaningful payment on that. But you're right. Some of these folks come out with several $1,000 guide fees, court costs. The pull that comes in with this, of course, is that many of the fees that are actually are in first go to actually fund some of the agencies. So you have issues there that, yes, it would probably be a great idea if you could waive some of those costs and fees, and some courts do. But there is that push and pull that goes on there, that there are some costs that's they're funding staff and things like that to be able to run things like that. Well, and that's part of the issue of even from a probation standpoint, the recommendation of sending those to collections. Yes, it does provide an additional civil burden on that individual, but they don't have to they're off probation. They're not having to comply with all the terms and conditions that they would originally have to. And so there's some benefits there for the offender, even though you would be sending it to collections. That's kind of the rationale that I think the commission kind of took in making that. House Bill 2092, again, is still in House of Corrections at this point. We've had a lot of discussions about the registry, and that sit here for another several hours and talk about the viability of the offender registry at this point. But the main recommendation that the Sentencing Commission is putting forward is to take off those drug offenders that are registry. Most of you are familiar with having sex offenders on the registry. Not a problem. But Kansas is one of the few states that has a violent registry as well as a drug offender registry. They're all treated the same. And so there's been discussions the last 2 or 3 years in Judicial Council, which they've had a bill that has gone through House Corrections. There is also discussions in the Sentencing Proportionality Committee of the Court Commission as well that is talking about perhaps modifying that as well. This is another option too, because there are a whole lot of folks that are getting felony convictions for things that simply a status offense. I don't fail to register. It's a felony. There is really, I don't know that anybody's identified at this point any other crime that you can actually not do something and get a felony conviction. I don't go to the sheriff's office and register 4 times. And that's just if I lived and worked in the same jurisdiction. If I worked in another jurisdiction, went to school in another jurisdiction, I would have to register 12 times. And pay $20 every time. So there's a lot of moving parts with the offender registry, and it just isn't as simple as we need to have these folks so we know where they are. There's dilution that occurs with the drug offender registry, and that's part of where the commission is coming from. There's certainly no research that supports offender registries to deter or decrease recidivism. And so law enforcement is going to, and my good friend Ed Hoff is going to tell you that law enforcement just likes to have it. And that may be the case, but at the same time, it's a situation that it doesn't provide anything. In fact, in some cases, folks that aren't on the registry are actually committing the offenses, not folks on the registries. So, so enough with that. So you're going to see probably different variations of things, and I think that it's a good idea to maybe think about where everybody can come down on actually doing something this session with this, because I think this is important, whether or not we keep the drug offenders in or not, but at least have a safety valve for people that are compliant after a certain period. If you're compliant for 10 years, isn't that good enough? Those type of things that, little things that Reform Commission is talking about. The Judicial Council, as my understanding, is coming back with their bill. And so I think it's going to be a topic that needs to be dealt with. Appreciate your patience. This is a form of procedural bill that provides for concurrent and consecutive sentences. There are carve-outs in the sentencing guidelines that are called special. It's 5 foot in here. Special Rule 10, 26, 12. Actually just modify that procedural way. The second and thirds are pretty much just technical. Now, this one would just allow the court more discretion to look at the defender committed an offense while they were already on bond. It would allow the court to potentially run their sentence consecutively. Right now it's automatically consecutive, and the court doesn't have the ability to have any discretion on it. So that is, that's House Bill 20. These next 2147 and 2139 are bills that I think we're going to try and potentially put together. This changes, as I told you before, the level 5 drug offenders for all possessions, and we're proposing to actually. This actually allows for release of those severity level 2 through 5 on probation. Allows them to be sent back to probation after 50% of their sentence, and if they successfully complete that, then they're off supervision. If they don't, they still could be revoked back to prison. So it's another option to get those drug offenders out, and most likely get more treatment. Nothing against DOC certainly, but and the research indicates as well, those folks that have substance abuse issues are always better treated in the community than they are in the setting. And so this aims to look at that and it's a fairly significant bed savings. All right, 2139 takes simple drug possession at level 5, and it actually makes it enforceable. This was a Reform Commission recommendation as well. It takes and makes those crimes, as far as the duration of the sentence, similar to that of severity level 8 felony, and still it doesn't apply to manufacturing, distribution, possession crime. And so it would essentially change the number of months for sentencing. 2146 expands the drug grid as far as presumptive probation. When the grid was first implemented in '93, there was about 2 presumption probation boxes, and this actually, as time has gone on, we recognized the need for that to be more of a public health issue than a punishment issue, and so this further expands the drug grid into levels 4 and 5 to give offenders more opportunity to receive probation. This was something that was already worked out in committee and House Corrections. It got out of committee in the form that it did after we worked with all the parties, but it didn't ever get hearing on the floor. So that's what denied. So this is something that we would be bringing back with the 2350. This is something that, as many of you know, Council for State Governments has been working with the state for many, actually quite a few years now. This was also a recommendation that, based upon their analysis of, we've given them some data to look at, of actually expanding the non-drug grid for probation and border boxes. This was actually to realize the reality of what was happening in the courts all over the state, and that was that folks were actually subject to prison range boxes. They were actually getting probation, and so this actually reflects the reality of what's actually happening out there. So that is in the House Corrections right now. Finally, the last one to talk about is in the Senate Judiciary right now, Senate Bill 5. This again raises the threshold from 1,000 to 1,500 as far as the loss for 11 property crimes. Back in 2016, the legislature approved raising theft to $1,500 threshold from $1,000. The AG came around in 2018, asked to raise the threshold for mistreatment of dependent adults. That was done again in 2018. This is simply asking to raise all of those other 11 property crimes up to that same threshold. It's a proportionality issue. Again, it's a joint recommendation. So I appreciate your patience. We've gone long here. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But again, thank you so much for the opportunity. Again, we are available to you. We are willing, if you have a filing bill that you need an impact on, shoot me an email. If you need anything else that has to do with something that we do, please call on us.
Scott, thank you. They provide us on. Did want to mention just a couple. Have a criminal justice reform commission. I was authorized for another year's work session. Wrapping that up. So be on the lookout for that report. It also addresses many of these same recommendations. We have a little bit of and also some additional recommendations.
So much. Was able to find that. Make sure I think like some research set it out. If we are about over, so see the business today, tomorrow.